Okay, so it's been 5 minutes and we can kick off. And since this is on recording, there will be replays available. So people who join later, they can go to replays and catch up with whatever they have missed. Right. So first of all, a big thank you to Mahesh ji. And today's session, what we planned was that we will do it like a quick conversation, the first half between me and Maheshji. I will just be asking some leading questions so that Maheshji can take us through this fascinating journey of Savitri, the legend and the symbol. And later on, we'll open to Q&A, and you can join the speakers panel, and we'll try to make it more engaging. And if this format works out well, we will have more sessions. Mahesh ji is new to Clubhouse. He had tried it in the past, and I think he had not taken on. Now he has obliged my request, and I'm I'm training him on how to use Clubhouse. So we'll kick off with a quick introduction of um, the background to this room today, context to this room today. So, for a few years now, a few years ago for me, there was this um, the word we use is sankalpa. Something happened, and I felt I should take up this task of translating Savitri to Kannada. Kannada is the language in which I mainly work. And I've been sharing that with people I interact here in Clubhouse. And recently that thing came up, and Vinodji, who is in the listeners panel, he said we should probably have a room talking about Savitri. Now, Maheshji, who has joined us here, he has kind of been instrumental for me in actually getting that confidence to even looking at Savitri and attempting to start translating it. I found Savitri many, many years ago. I think it's about 30 odd years ago. But my first two attempts at even entering Savitri were utter failures. I remember reading a few pages and literally crying because I could see that there is something there of immense beauty, but I just um, couldn't grasp it. So it was always there with me, but I was not allowed. I was kept as an outsider. I was, it's almost something was pushing me away. And I found Maheshji, who goes by the name Kali's Brew on Twitter and here on Clubhouse as well. And one thing he does is he writes a response to Savitri. Every day he posts response to Savitri in the same poetic fashion. Uh, I had found Maheshji first because he is a poet, and I had found striking similarity. It was almost like what I had written in Kannada, he had written in English, and I had not known him. We have not met or anything, and there was that kindred spirit kind of almost synchronous association. So when I found his approach to Savitri, that kind of opened up, and it made it accessible, made Savitri accessible to me. So when I decided to have this room on Savitri, I thought best to invite Maheshji to take us on this journey. So that's a brief context to why we are here. Maheshji, can you please give us a quick introduction of yourself, and then we can kick off?
Absolutely. And one request, Hemant, please
Yeah.
skip the G, no? Uh,
Well, see, you forbid the sir, yeah. So I've left the sir, and I'm calling you
no,
G.
I don't know. No sir,
Right.
no G, nothing. Just Mahesh
All
will
right.
do, please.
Okay. I'll stick to Mahesh then. All right, Mahesh.
Thank you,
A
thank you.
quick introduction, please. Thank you.
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah.
So, hello everybody. Um, my sort of journey, like Hemant had mentioned, right? My journey with Sri Aurobindo began almost 25, 30 years back, um, uh, post the high school phase, right? Post the high school phase. There were a few curves I'd gone through, Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna path. So there was an intense aspiration. And somehow, I like to think of it as the master's will, right? We stumbled upon Sri Aurobindo. So when I say we, me and a friend of mine, uh, who I also think of as my mentor, his name is Murli. He's not here today, but maybe some other day he'll join. And it was almost a miraculous process, right? I mean, I like to recount it, because it's always special. So we were what 22, 23 back at that time, and we were roaming through the library, the Madras University library, and there were these huge books, leather bound, basically untouched, a whole, I think, 18 or 19 volumes or maybe more of some book. The title was not visible there. So we picked the book at random. So I picked a book and my friend picked a book, and it turned out that I picked up Secret of the Veda by Sri Aurobindo. I'd barely heard of him. I didn't know who this man was, right? Just a book, right? And later that evening, when I came and read, and I opened the book, I'm sitting on a small chair back at my house in Chennai, the southern portion of India, for those who are not familiar. Uh, it just flung me into an experience. I was just reading it. There was aspiration, but it just flung me straight, outright, boom. Just, I'm there in a different time and space. And this is me, 23, 24. I don't do drugs, so I'm not, imagining this, or it's not some hallucination, wide waking state, normal consciousness and experience, right? Now, that was my entry to Sri Aurobindo and his works. And Savitri, of course, was special. So I'll get to, this sort of things that happen there. We'll get to that separately, and what would help when approaching Savitri. We'll get to that in just a moment. But yeah, that's the introduction that matters here for this context. So yeah, that's it, Hemant.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mahesh. That's yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So before we dive into Savitri,
Mhm.
what happened to me when I first approached Savitri was language. The language itself is, it's an exalted language that Aravindo uses. But at the same time, there is also this the whole taxonomy. Aravindo
Yeah,
uses words in a very specific sense.
yeah,
So here in Clubhouse, what I have noticed is, so we kind of over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've become a very beautiful community. There are people here from various paths, if you will,
oh, wonderful.
Advaita or Buddhism or Kashmiri Shaivism, Tantra, Yoga. There's various different people of various different paths who are all kind of approaching the same thing from different paths. And normally what happens is the discussions get around defining those words, right? The
Yeah,
taxonomy.
yeah,
So can we kick off with first talking a little bit about the master's taxonomy? which
Absolutely.
kind of will make it easy for the further reading. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, like Hemant mentioned, right? Because we all come from, we all are sort of coming to this journey and to this room from different perspectives. Um, when you're looking at, when you're reading any of Sri Aurobindo's works, it always helps to be clear about the taxonomy upfront. His worldview, so to speak, right? So when I say worldview, so each path has a certain perspective laid out by the guru, right? Whoever is the initiator of that particular path, whether it's one person or a series of seers, based on their experience, they look at the human condition and the human being, the being itself, in very specific ways. And similarly with Sri Aurobindo. Now, uh, for those of you who are sort of coming from the Vedantic path, or let's say the Buddhist path, which is slightly more precise in terms of how it addresses the various conditions, the states of the human person. Sri Aurobindo has a specific taxonomy where he gets very precise. Now, in this style of his, right, he follows the Tantra model very closely, because Tantra, amongst most Hindu paths, is very precise, it's technical, it's almost like the thinking man's path, right? It's very scientific, so to speak, in the way it classifies various aspects of the spiritual phenomena. So now Sri Aurobindo has his taxonomy. By the way, Hemant and I, we were trying to search for this nice little drawing which Sri Aurobindo had done with his own hand, illustrating the hierarchy of consciousness. Now, we couldn't find it. There is a portion of that image which is there in the description, I think, which I had shared with
Yeah,
Hemant
I, I
yesterday.
will I will share that link in the chat over here,
Yeah,
so that
yeah,
other
yeah.
people can access it. Yeah, sure.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But that the image that we shared contains only the higher strata of the whole taxonomy. But for the lower hemisphere, right, for things in the lower hemisphere, which is most relevant to us, that we as sadhaks, are confronted with on a daily basis. The layers are something like this, right? First is the inconscient, which is at the very bottom. I'm simplifying this just so that it's a little easier. Inconscient, it's the very negation of everything. Inconscient is the opposite of the superconscient, right? So inconscient is at the very bottom. Then above it is the subconscient, which is, you can think of it like the dream state, the subconscious, right? Uh, at the collective level. So I'm not, these states are not alluding to the individual level, though you have access to it. So then comes the subconscious layer, subconscient, he calls it. And above the subconscient comes matter, right? So when I say matter, it's your physical sheath, the Annamaya Deha, right? The body of food, the Upanishad calls it. So it's the Annamaya Deha, and above it is the prana layer, or the vital sheath, or the life sheath, if you like to think about it that way. So the vital sheath is your life energy, your emotion, instinct, and all of that stuff, right? It's all in that particular layer. And above it is the manas, or the manomaya purusha, or the manomaya deha. It's the mind layer which sits on top of it, and it goes on. The sheets keep going on up until it reaches the atman, and then it goes on. So the whether consciously or unconsciously, we'll be sort of touching this particular terminology, because the phenomenon of consciousness at the material level, it takes certain forms, even as your body, right? If you think of your body, the way your body reacts, it's not just the body alone, because many times it's the vital layer that's doing its thing, right? Within the envelope of the physical sheath itself. And then above it is your mental layer. So it's the interaction of these three layers that we consider as the human being. That's the foundation of our sadhana. That's our starting point. So just remember these three aspects. As in, when you get time, please, dig into Sri Aurobindo's, hierarchy of consciousness, which will not only make it easy for you to understand what he's saying, when he speaks of particular phenomena, to identify, you can, first make a mental note of it. But more important is when an experience occurs to you, whether it's a spiritual experience or otherwise, you're able to situate where it's coming from so that you can employ the right means, be precise about the means to tackle that issue, right? So it is very helpful if you think of it in these manner, in this manner, rather than having a what do you say, a blanket term, right? So rather than having a blanket term which describes the condition, so it gives us a little precision in terms of how we are looking at the phenomena. Now, yeah. So I think that should be enough for now, Hemant. We'll dig into details as needed.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Mahesh. So, in then, then without further ado, then can you please, take us on this journey of Savitri?
Yeah,
Savitri, it's there is the title I think is Savitri, the legend and the symbol, right? So there is the legend aspect of it, and there is that symbolism.
yeah,
Using that legend, there is a parallel story that is being told by Aurobindo. So please, I'll leave it to you now to take us on this journey.
yeah, yeah. Thanks, Hemant. So before we get to Savitri itself, I want us to I want to sort of drill down into a little context, right? A little more context in terms of how we, or rather, how we could look at Savitri, right? In the whole pantheon of spiritual literature. So when I say pantheon of spiritual literature, I'm not talking about any specific literature. I'm taking the entire lot, right? Take the entire lot, all the spiritual attempts of the world, take all of them, and if you think of it like a continuum, a sort of continuity, right? Now, where does Savitri stand, and what would be most fruitful for us as seekers when we approach this particular book? Now, so for that particular purpose, I'm going to sort of step back and take a slight diversion, a relevant diversion, but still, so let me just dig in. Now, amongst the most spiritual literatures of the world, uh, the Veda, from the Hindu tradition, the Veda, I'm sure most of you are familiar, but the Veda is considered the sort of benchmark, the bedrock of anything that is Hindu, right? Pretty much anything that you get to see from all the streams that have developed out of this, out of the Hindu tradition, they all somehow, in one way or the other, they sort of reach out to the Veda and consider it the foundation. Now, sadly, and I use this word very consciously, right? And sadly, though tradition and convention agree that the Veda is knowledge, um, you can hardly find any living practitioner of that knowledge who has attained that knowledge, sadly, but that's the reality, right? So I'm not talking about being able to perform a specific homa or a ritual or a yajna. I'm not alluding to all of that. I'm talking about if there is certain experience spoken of in the Veda, how many have got it, right? And you could literally count it on the on your fingers, right? Uh, uh, so now this is not a new phenomena. This is not a new phenomena. Even Sri Aurobindo mentions it actually. Now, for again, the Veda, for those of you who are not familiar, there are sort of four broad blocks, right? Sections that the Veda is made up of. The first is the Samhita, that's the mantra portion. Then is the Aranyaka. Aranyaka is, the guidelines of what rituals are supposed to be done, what is the, how are you supposed to do it, etc., etc. Then there's the Brahmana portion. which is the commentary, right, on why you ought to do a certain thing, why you ought to perform a specific ritual in a specific way. And then finally, you have the Upanishadic section, which is, conventionally treated as, the books of knowledge. The Veda is considered, the other three sections are considered as the book of works, Karma Kanda, and the Upanishad is the Jnana Kanda, the knowledge portion. But Sri Aurobindo says something else. Now, what he says is, by the time you've reached the Brahmana section, largely the knowledge has been lost from active practice. The seers are no longer there. The seers who saw the mantra, who saw it in their inner perception, who heard the mantra, they are long gone, long gone. And the Brahmana section specifically, Sri Aurobindo says, is an attempt by the people of that time to document at the highest degree possible on the possible reasons why these were done. So you're looking at a situation where even during the Brahmana time, the knowledge of how the rishis of the Samhita portion, how they got to it is already lost, right? And then he says the Upanishadic section, which is the youngest in comparison, but which comes again much later, obviously. Sri Aurobindo says that these were rishis who had some idea of the Samhita portion, of all the truths that are encoded in the Samhita portion. And he uses a specific phrase. And he says these were rishis who, through the power of aspiration, tried to storm the gates of the truth. They flung themselves by aspiration, using intuition, inspiration, any one of these tools, and they sort of went and hit the highest truths straight, right? And he uses that term very specifically. Now, you will find that in the way the Upanishads are structured, right? If you look at any of the Upanishads, they're very, very cryptic. They are aphoristic, there is no guidelines that are given. These are like, I'm in a hurry. Here's this humongous task, of discovering the highest truth. And here are, observations that I've made. And again, it's all inspired language, mantric language. Uh, but still, these are not. I mean, for example, you can't take the Kathopanishad and say, okay, let me practice yoga by looking at the Kathopanishad. It's not going to make sense to you. Or the Isha, one of the loftiest Upanishads, hardly 20 odd lines, and people spend lifetimes to parse and realize those 20 odd lines, and it's still difficult, right? Because they're talking about very, very high states, very complex levels of realization. Now, now it is in this context. So you have the Vedas, so things are already lost. The realization is lost. There are multiple attempts made to preserve it. The Upanishadic rishis have gone and discovered it. Now, subsequently, you have the period of the Puranas, right? You have the period of the Puranas where some of these high truths are captured. It's understood mentally, and they're being put into a sort of mythical form, given a sort of elaborate structure, so that many of these truths could be encoded, so that it can go reach the common minds in a much more easier manner. So you see this entire continuum with the Samhita rishis being bang at the top, and then things getting diluted over a period of time. Now, now keep this aside, right? And let's come to let's talk about Vyasa. Now we all know that Vyasa was the rishi who had sort of compiled the Vedas. The Vedas were sort of spread all around the place across the country, perhaps, uh, and Vyasa brings them together and gives them a coherent structure, right? Yeah. Now, we are not going to get into technicalities of, because not much is known on why he organized things in a certain way. The basic classification we understand, but nothing beyond that. But here is a curious thing. The classifier or the organizer of the Veda is also the author of the Mahabharata. Now, keep that in mind. So, whenever you read either the Veda or if you're reading the Mahabharata, always bear in mind that it's the same seer, same rishi, same chap who's doing both these tasks, right? Now, why is this important? This is important because if you read the Mahabharata generally, as the conflict between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, there is a certain level of information that you get from it. There's a certain level of meaning and so on. But if you ponder a little more, you might surmise. I mean, we can surmise that perhaps there could be more that Vyasa is doing, right? Uh, the, there could be more that Vyasa is doing, right? Now, what do I mean by more? Now, here again, I'll take another step back. Now, when Sri Aurobindo looks at when he when he reads the Mahabharata, after he had read the Mahabharata in the original and so on, he makes a very specific observation. He says that there are three hands that have gone into the Mahabharata. I mean, when I say three hands, three authors, right? So he says, there's a lot of interpolation. And in fact, for those of you who are interested, there's a little booklet called Essays on the Mahabharata by Sri Aurobindo. You can sort of find them online also. So you can check them out. So he's looking at it and he says that, there are three hands. And he says, first is, of course, Vyasa, the epic poet, very severe, very gaunt, sort of very sparse style, right? It's the he's a court seer. His style is very lofty, bare, goes to the truth directly. Not many embellishments like what, let's say, a Valmiki would do, right? This guy is, very, very sparse style, right? And Sri Aurobindo says that there's another hand, or equal poetic skill, enormous poetic skill, really good. And he says the third hand is a very inferior hand, poet who sort of come and put these interpolations. Now, we're not going to, again, get into details of what these interpolations are, but remember this aspect, right? Vyasa, very sparse style, very, just the material that's needed and nothing more. That's his poetic style, right? Now, keeping this in mind, now imagine now that Vyasa with that sort of a style goes and embeds this little nugget of a story in the middle of the Mahabharata, right? In the middle of the Mahabharata, there is again, for those of you who have sort of read at least some of the Mahabharata, it's a very recursive beast. It's a story within a story within a story, just endlessly keeps on going. Now, in that jungle of words, let's call it that way, right? In that jungle of words, in a little thicket, Vyasa goes and puts this little story hidden, makes no fuss about it. It's not given any prominence. It's just there. It's a little story that's sitting there. Now, if you look at the size of the story, it's not even the size of a short story. It's very, very small. It's as if he's just rushing through details. That's Vyasa's style. You can't do anything about it. But remember, this is Sri Aurobindo who's reading it. As in, he's evaluating not only the poetry, but also the mind of the poet that has written it. So he's sort of reading between the lines, he's reading the mind that has written these lines. He's sort of evaluating all this as he's looking at the source material. Now, he comes across this little story uh, of Satyavan and Savitri. And like he mentions now, Hemant also just said, Sri Aurobindo's subtitle is A Legend and a Symbol, right? He calls it a legend and a symbol. But look back to what Sri Aurobindo would have looked at it, how he would have looked at it. Now, the very means that's the beauty of what Vyasa is doing here, right? I mean, and when I'd first come across this, it just flashed across my eyes, inner eyes, so to speak, right? When it flashed, I was baffled. I was in awe because such a great possibility is being embedded there as if it's a nothing, and it it is there in camouflage, so to speak, until the right sort of mind is going and looking at the issue. Now, what's the issue? We don't have to dig into details. We don't have to do grammar. We don't have to do etymology, or I mean a little bit of etymology perhaps, but look at the names. I'll just the names. One is Satyavan, of course. Another is Savitri, and she's the heroine. Now Savitri is the daughter of Savitr. Now, for those of you again who are familiar, Savitr is the spiritual sun. Savitr is the deity that you pray to in the Gayatri mantra. Now, Vishwamitra's Gayatri mantra, the it prays to Savitr. It says it wants that spiritual sun to come and illumine the mind. That's what the Gayatri is doing. Now, Savitri is the force of Savitr. It's the divine word, the knowledge of that spiritual sun is that feminine form. That is Savitri. So you have Satyavan. So the Satya is truth. You can Satyavan is truth. Savitri is the power of that spiritual word of the spiritual sun. Now here it gets interesting, right? Ashwapati. Right. You don't have to know Sanskrit. I mean, a little bit perhaps, but you don't have to be very detailed. You don't need initiation. You don't need any special this thing. Look at the word Ashwa, Pati. You know, and Ashwa is horse, and Pati is husband or lord. So here it's lord of the horse. Now, in the Vedic mindset, or even the Puranic mindset to an extent, words always had a sort of double, triple meaning. Now, for various reasons, right? One was this knowledge was so powerful that they had to keep it secret. This knowledge was being transmitted from the guru to the disciple and so on in a line of succession of in a sort of line of succession, right? That's how this knowledge is being transmitted. So pretty much anything that you come across across in the Veda, especially the Rig Veda, has a double meaning. So the horse is used as a as a symbol of force of tapasya. What force of tapasya? Tapasya is ascesis. It's that activated will, that energy, that willpower. Willpower is again a very loose, very diluted rendition of it. But tapasya is the right word. It's that spiritual ascesis. It's that intense effort, that heat that is generated. Now he is the Lord of tapasya, Ashwapati, right? Now, the moment you look at the names, right, you don't have to know anything else. The moment you look at the names, someone like Sri Aurobindo, it must have struck him that, it's not a story about a chaste wife winning back her husband from death. The gain is entirely different. Though it is being, the story is being spoken in the form of, in the context of, is there a woman more chaste than Draupadi? I think, it's in that context that the story is being said. But what is happening is completely something else. And you have Satyavan's father, Jumatsena. Now, he's a blind, he's a blind king who's been exiled. And it is not a surprise at all that such a story would have struck Sri Aurobindo as something that is sort of very, very different than what is being apparently said, right? Now, it is in that context that we have to approach Savitri because it has been put there by Vyasa for a specific reason. Sri Aurobindo is picking it up for a very specific reason. Of all the tales that are there in the world pantheon, right? The Hindu pantheon and let's say the Greek and so many great traditions. But there is one that is being picked up for his for his epic work, and he uses this because it provides the broadest possible framework to express what he had to express. Now, what do I mean by what he had to express? Again, for those of you who are not familiar, uh, Sri Aurobindo has attempted to render this problem of, the problem of death, in many, many poetic efforts, throughout his life. But Savitri itself specifically was begun in the Pondicherry period. And before it was begun, tells mother, who was his, again, for those who are not familiar, was a spiritual collaborator. He tells the mother, I'm going to begin something big, right? So let's see how far it goes, right? Now, this was so important. This was so important that he considered it a big effort. Now, this is someone who's spitting out hundreds and hundreds of lines of poetry all his life, right? And he makes this particular observation. And elsewhere, he makes another observation. He says it was an experiment for him, uh, writing Savitri, to see from how high up, you know, as he was venturing through various planes of consciousness, from how high up he could bring down some of that light and beauty and power and pour it into written words. Okay. Now here I have to make another little observation. Um, Sri Aurobindo, especially whether it's in prose or poetry, when he's using when he's talking of a specific occurrence, right? It is always by experience. Now, always remember that anything you look at in Savitri, whether it's a epithet that is using a specific adjective, anything, he's so precise. If he has not looked at it, he won't write about it, right? Now it's that sort of a being who's sort of poured, all his discoveries, whatever he's gone through, whatever he wanted to express, he's poured all of that into Savitri. That's what Savitri is. It's that basic standard. Conjugal love is the traditional notion which survives in popular culture. But to the initiate, to the sadhaks, we have to look at Vyasa first, then Sri Aurobindo, who sort of knows this symbolic thing that's happening and all the thing that's lurking behind, and uh, him rendering this particular poem so that all the complexity of the inner journey, of the spiritual journey, can be captured. Now, here I would like to make another observation, right? We usually know of the Veda as a bunch of mantras, right? And most of us don't even know what the mantras do, what they mean, nothing. But just for I mean, if you dig in a little bit into Savitri, then it'll prepare you to sort of look at the Veda directly. Any translation, even that'll do. Even Master's translation, even Sri Aurobindo's translations, right? It should be you should be able to go through Secret of the Veda with not much difficulty. If you look at it, you will see that all these mantras are experiences of seers, right? So when you speak of mantra, or this inspired language, right? They are not talking about, it's not just prayer, it's not just aspiration, it's about a specific state of consciousness that the Rishi has attained, an experience that he has got. There's a certain thing that's occurring in his being, and he's documenting it, right? So from that perspective, you can think of the Veda as the record of yoga, of the rishis. Now, if you look at it that way, it becomes a trillion times more useful for our aspiration. So I mean it very specifically. To not look at the Veda as something said by rishis who lived thousands of years back. No, it's a set of experiences they had. When you read it with the aspiration that you need to understand it and that you need to gain that experience. And trust me, the experiences come. Now, you need to do the same thing with Savitri. Just like the Veda is the record of yoga of the Vedic rishis, Savitri is the record of yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, right? Of both of them. And you will see this documented in tremendous amount of detail. Tremendous detail. Now, before let's say, before Sri Aurobindo, you have this taboo in the Hindu tradition. Very unfortunately, uh, you have this taboo that you're not supposed to speak of your spiritual experiences. If you speak of your spiritual experiences, they'll get diluted and all of that nonsense, right? You're not supposed to speak of the mantra that you got from your guru. There are a lot of these accretions that are there, and which are not very helpful, right? Not very helpful, because if you don't have a documented record of experiences, when you have an experience, you do not know how to understand it. You can't classify it. You can't, sort of situate yourself. in this journey. You do not know whether you're beginning, whether you have made any progress, you can't evaluate yourself, and so on. Now, but with Sri Aurobindo and his yoga, you will see the spiritual process documented. Now, before Sri Aurobindo does this, I have a great fondness for the Buddha, because the Buddha was very precise. The man documented, and I absolutely do an Shashtanga Namaskara for the Buddha, because there's no nonsense. He's exactly telling you what is happening, what will happen. If you have this symptom, then you're at this particular stage, right? So it's very difficult to bullshit around in the Buddhist path, because you know where you are, at least to yourself, right? You can always bullshit to others, but you know exactly where you are. Now, that is what Savitri does, because it is an entire journey that's documented in a tremendous amount of detail. Now, which again brings another danger, not danger, but little confusion, right? And the confusion is that if again, like I said in the beginning, if you do not know the cosmology, or the taxonomy that Sri Aurobindo is putting forth, you do not know where you are, etc., etc. It makes it difficult for you to understand. But with Savitri, once you are familiar with the taxonomy, because he has sort of documented this journey in painstaking detail, you have an enormous, what do you say? I like to think of it as a treasure. It's a spiritual treasure, right? You exactly know where you are. If you do not know where you are, you can aspire for it, and things will happen. Now, so when we look at Savitri, this is how we look at it, right? A record of yoga of the Vedic rishis as the Veda, record of yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother is Savitri. Of course, this is not to be confused with another, a couple of books. There are two volumes called Record of Yoga of Sri Aurobindo. That's a different beast, because it was a private diary that Sri Aurobindo used to maintain of the experiences that he was going through. Okay. Now, for those of you who are reckless enough, please go and read that book. It's crazy, because uh, it's how do I put it? It's the spiritual growth that would typically occur over 50, 60 years. He's just going through it in an afternoon, and he's documenting it in very precise language, and he's writing everything down. Now, this covers only a very short period of 15 to 20 years, I think. But record of yoga, if once you become familiar with Savitri, then you can sort of venture, because there's a lot of things that are not in Savitri that he has covered in his record of yoga. Because it's his private diary, so he's not, either sugarcoating it, or listening it down so that it's sort of reachable to a lay audience. He's not doing it. This is brutal literature. So when I say brutal, it's like, I don't know, a book of quantum mechanics, which is just equations, right? It's literally like that, right? But Savitri, as I said, is the record of yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. And when you approach it, if you approach it from that perspective, I've found it, at least personally, I've found it most fruitful, right? So that's what Savitri is. So legend and a symbol is very mild subtitle, and like I said, this once you're on Savitri, you are literally you will see a lot of parallels with Puranas. If you're familiar with Puranas, you will find those same tropes coming here. Now, these are not for poetic effect or anything like that, because the spiritual phenomena that are being undergone are best represented in that way, right? So the Purana does that, and that's when you gain new respect for the Puranas, right? Because I mean, after I'd gone through Savitri, many of the episodes in the Puranas which sound fantastical, I've again stood in awe, jaw dropping sort of awe, right? Saying, how the hell did you think of that symbol? What were you thinking? Because it is so brilliant the way they have captured that experience. Now, it is fantastical until you have that experience. When you have that experience, you think, damn, there's no other way I would have expressed it. because that's the most apt way, right? Now, that goes for all the symbols that you see, whether in the Puranas or the Upanishads. For example, uh, now here's something I can share with you, right? Like I said, coming from Sri Aurobindo's tradition, we don't have the usual old taboos like Hemant doesn't have, right? We freely speak about, what has happened from our inner experience perspective to each other whenever we get the chance. There was this particular time, and of course, I'm just plucking out one incident out of many that have happened with Savitri and Sri Aurobindo. There was this particular day. I think it was around 8:45 in the morning. I was brushing my teeth. It can't get more mundane than this, right? I was brushing my teeth. On the other hand was Savitri. I was sort of reading Savitri. And there's this particular passage. Now, I don't want to tell the passage because I don't want to, bias your side, or I don't want you to go try to read it and try to gain the same experience. It doesn't work like that. It'll open up when it has to open up, right? I was reading this particular passage, which was alluding to, there is this very famous Upanishadic image of two birds that are sitting on a tree. There is a bird which is eating fruits, all colored fruits that it's eating, and there is a copy. There is a luminous copy of this bird that is eating fruits, which is on a higher branch, and which is looking at the bird down below, which is eating. It's a luminous bird, which is looking at the other, normal earthly bird eating all these fruits. And the Upanishad says that, the bird keeps eating the fruit until the lower bird looks up at the higher bird, and then boom, something happens, right? That's the Upanishadic imagery. Now, it was a similar imagery that was being described in that particular passage in Savitri. And believe it or not, flung immediately, boom, and I'm still continuing to brush my teeth. And everything just shifted. I was there somewhere far above, inside, still within the body. And how do I put it? And I instantly remembered that Upanishadic story, because Upanishadic, symbol, because it was so clear. It was luminous, calm, absolute. And it sort of, of course, I was not eating any fruit, I was brushing my teeth. But I'm like to emphasize this particular point because the power of what Master has put into Savitri is such. If you read with the aspiration, it'll just fling, it'll just fling you into that experience. You don't need, again, apologies to, people who are fond of the traditional path. You don't need any specific initiation. You don't need any of that. There's only few things, right? One is aspiration, another is time, of course, guidance of the guru. Sri Aurobindo mentions this somewhere, right? He says, what are the elements that are needed for the spiritual path? One is, the sadhaka, of course, that's us. And he says, you need a guru, the guide on the path. Then you need the scripture. That's going to give you the daily, step-by-step guidelines or whatever. And then he says you need utsaha, enthusiasm, right? And then he says finally kala, time. He says you need time for its ripening. So that's all that you need, because when you look at Savitri, treat it like a Shastra, treat it like a poem. It doesn't matter how you treat it, but approach it with the aspiration that you need to experience all of that stuff. And that's a mistake that's typically done by a lot of, unfortunately, again, most spiritual traditions, right? And I'm, let's say, bothered especially about the Hindu one, right? uh, you People read the Upanishad, they are capable of, talking for hours on the Upanishad. But the basic thing, right? Have you realized? Have you had the experience of the silent Brahman? Have you had experience of the dynamic Brahman? Can you shut down this thing? Can you transform this particular element of your consciousness? And unfortunately, you find that that is lacking. Right? People can talk about grammar, the nuances, they can, talk about commentaries, but uh, the experience, the lived experience of how that particular state of consciousness is like. And fortunately for us, Savitri covers a whole gamut. maybe not a whole gamut, covers the gamut, right? It goes through your vital planes, mental planes, as high as you can possibly go in a human form. It covers everything, right? So many times, if you're not able to sort of understand what he's speaking of, etc., just make this accommodation in your mind that it is a realization that you are yet to attain. Read it with that perspective, and I'm sure, as in when you're ready, the thing will open up, right? And it opens up in the most miraculous of ways, right? It really doesn't care whether you're in a coffee shop, the old usual taboos. Oh, you shouldn't read it here, you shouldn't read it there. That hardly applies. All that matters is aspiration. The Guru and the Shastra are both sitting in Savitri. Now, before I sort of finish this particular section, I want to make one particular point on how important Savitri is. There's an actual anecdote from the master himself, right? Now, it looks like one of the disciples, when master was his legs were broken and he was sort of, he had come out of his isolation, so to speak, right? So there was this particular day when a disciple comes and he's sort of organizing master's writing desk, right? He's sort of, arranging the papers, so to speak. And master was sitting on the bed, okay, leaning on the bed to something. And when it looks like the disciple took the manuscripts, took the written manuscripts, and he kept something on top. I don't know, maybe it's a paperweight or kept other papers on top of the Savitri manuscripts. And Master tells him, he says, would you mind not keeping anything on top of Savitri? Okay. And I don't remember the exact, words that he used, but the effect was, I've poured my everything into it. He says, don't keep anything on top, right? Now, it gives me goosebumps to even say this because ever since I read it, I don't keep anything on top of my copy of Savitri that's sitting around. That is how he viewed it. The words that he had poured into it, you want to call it mantric language, spiritual literature, inspired literature, epic poetry, consider it however you want, but it's there, living words, and they can fling you into that state of realization. So, that is Savitri, high level introduction, I know, but I'll stop there.
Wow, beautiful, Mahesh. Thank you so much for that.
Namaskara, Hemant.
That was, yeah. Now, you said there was one particular thing that flung you into a certain
Yeah,
experience. We will leave those lines
yeah,
away.
of course,
We
of
will
course,
not
of
use
course.
those lines. But can you just read a few lines from Savitri randomly? And basically, this is a poet to poet question.
Hmm.
I just wanted to talk about what happens to you when when Master's words pour into you. Just describe that state of consciousness.
Yeah. So, s- like you had mentioned, Hemant, your initial approach to Savitri, you mentioned something was locked, right? Something was locked, it kept you away. Uh, Savitri feels that way most of the times, even now, to me. Okay, when with the very first glance that you put onto it, it's as if there's something sitting in between. But over the years, it's gotten easier to sort of penetrate, or rather open oneself, and let the words do their magic. Let the words do their magic. But I do not know where to choose. I'll just, I don't know. You have any specific special section that you like?
No, no, no. I'll leave it to you. Anything, randomly pick
Okay,
something, and
I've just picked this
yeah,
randomly. Uh,
sure.
so this is from Book 9, the Book of Eternal Night, Canto 1, Towards the Black Void, right? And death is crying out to Savitri. Death is replying. She has said something. I don't want to go there right now. So this is on page 580. I do not know which edition. This is the revised edition of Savitri. Um, yeah, revised edition of Savitri. Page number 580, Book 9, the Book of Eternal Night, Canto 1, towards the Black Void. Um, we'll begin. But death pealed forth his vast abysmal cry. O mortal, turn back to thy transient kind. Aspire not to accompany death to his home, as if thy breath could live where time must die. Think not thy mind-born passion strength from heaven to uplift thy spirit from its earthly base, and, breaking out from the material cage, to upbuoy thy feet of dream in groundless knot, and bear thee through the pathless infinite. Only in human limits man lives safe. Trust not in the unreal lords of time, immortal deeming this image of thyself, which they have built on a dream's floating ground. Let not the dreadful goddess move thy soul to enlarge thy vehement trespass into worlds where it shall perish like a helpless thought. Know the cold tombstones of thy hopes in life. Armed vainly with the ideal's borrowed might, dare not to outstep man's bound and measured force. Ignorant and stumbling in brief boundaries spent, he crowns himself the world's mock suzerain, tormenting nature with the works of mind. O sleeper, dreaming of divinity, wake trembling mid the indifferent silences in which thy few weak chords of being die. Impermanent creatures, sorrowful foam of time, your transient loves bind not the eternal gods. The dreadful voice ebbed in the consenting hush, which seemed to close upon it, wide, intense, a wordless sanction from the jaws of night. The woman answered not. Her high, nude soul, stripped of the girdle of mortality, against fixed destiny and the grooves of law, stood up in its sheer will a primal force, still like a statue on its pedestal, lone in the silence, and to vastness bared, against midnight's dumb abysses piled in front, a columned shaft of fire and light she rose. So, and that is experience, right? So against midnight's dumb abysses piled in front, a columned shaft of fire and light she rose. So Savitri is lying down. She is holding Satyavan's body, right, in her arms, in her dead body, Satyavan's dead body. She's holding in her arms. She has seen Yama, death come, and our death come through there. Death is making this argument. He says, "Don't follow me. Don't bring your ideals, dreams in this place because you need to fear this thing. Don't bother, right?" But look at her response and look at how Sri Aurobindo is representing it. A columned shaft of fire and light she rose. Now, again, for those of you who are familiar with at least with the Patanjali yoga, traditions and so on, it's almost like a description of the Kundalini rising. Call them the shaft of fire and light. She's waking up, and she's not waking up physically. It's a subtle body because she is already realized because she's Savitri. She's already realized, and it's that Kundalini thing which is sort of rousing and waking her subtle body so that she can follow death. And that's what is happening. And that description is an exact description because if any of you have had the experience of Kundalini rising, you exactly know that that's how it feels. It's a column, it's a column shaft of fire and light, right? It's fiery. Here it looks beautiful. Of course, it's a much more scarier process when it happens. But yeah, that's what Sri Aurobindo is describing. He's describing how she woke up. Now, you will not find this in Vyasa's rendition of this, right? Because Vyasa is not interested to document all of this thing. He's just giving you the outline, and Sri Aurobindo is filling up the details, of how it happens, right? And this precision is again, unmatched in world literature. No one's going to tell you how it feels, how it happens, and you will find that in Savitri dime a dozen. Every page, it's just experience, and like I said, whether another specific adjective he's using, everything is precise to a level where it's unbelievable. And when you have that experience, it justifies itself, right? And like I said, the passage that I just read is Savitri waking up for her fight with death, and it's glorious. Yeah, it's one of those. It's like ode to joy times million or something like that. You know, it's
Beautiful,
really good.
beautiful. Oh God. I mean, just the visualization of it in itself is, oh wow. Beautiful, beautiful. I'm so grateful that you took us through this,
And I'm
Mahesh.
grateful for the opportunity,
Yeah.
Hemant.
We, yeah. So I think we should revisit
Yeah.
this. We will probably kind of make this series. I'm sure people will have a lot of questions. Before I open this to a
Hmm.
Q&A, if you permit
Yeah.
me, I would like to read your response to Savitri.
Absolutely, boss.
And to people who are listening, this is Mahesh G who has written it. This is I've just picked up randomly because I kind of over the years um, in fact I've stalked you for many years before I before I first said hello to
No,
you.
both of us are stalking master actually. He's eluding us. We'll have to get random someday.
Yeah, I took the other route. I surrendered to the mother, and she does all my
Oh,
bidding.
glorious.
Every once in a while, I bend over and take a whiplash from the master. But yeah, so I just randomly picked one of your responses. So this one is response to Book 10, Canto 4, where you say, all was a pristine expanse, yet somewhere lingered unseen a subtle shadow, refusing to refusing the complete ascent the earthbound must yield, the last stand of the shadow that must perish. Then it began, the assault of heaven on his time born parts. The inconceivable force of love descending like a crushing mass of molten force, piercing, enveloping with its irresistible power, bounding over his being's vast layers, acknowledging no defenses, it invaded all channels at once. A comprehensive assault of the immortal on the mortal. Entering the Ming, the material brain, it swooped under the press of two heavy feet, the little air of thought, and expunged the brain. Into the heart it descended and squeezed with violent love, the remnants too subtle for human thought. Into the nerves it poured like a burning ambrosia that bridged the subtle subliminal with the physical mesh. A divine current's shock shook its foundation, uprooted were all his human bases. She had made his entirety hers. She had made his entirety hers. Now it was her. Now it was her word that spoke and moved him. No gesture, no thought, no triviality could be his. He was because she was in him. His mighty horned will was cast away as an inconsequential appendage into some mystery space he knew not of. Stark he stood, too high for time, too mystic for the gods, but hung without will in that utter divine void. A spectacle never enacted in time, nor necessitated for the future. For he alone could bear that cataract, he alone could be the divine bridge. With his body, he performed the dreaded sacrifice. The timeless paid its debt to time. This did to me, Mahesh,
Yes,
this did to me when I read this for the first time, and that's why I had saved it. Actually, this did to me what Savitri did to you. This was like, you were talking of my experience almost.
glorious,
so,
glorious.
so how do you write this?
It, it's
How do you write this?
it's so this is what happens, right? So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this painter from the ashram called Preeti Ghosh. please remember that name. Um, Preeti Ghosh, some of her paintings that are hung in the ashram canteen. So if you've ever had food in the Sri Aurobindo Ashram cafeteria, canteen, you will see this glorious symbolic paintings that are hung on the walls, right? High on the walls, and it belongs to Preeti Ghosh, some of them. So there's a particular painting of hers where it's like a cavern, right? It's like a cave, a very illumined cave. And in the cave, there is this image of Sri Aurobindo seated on his sofa. You know, it's the very popular image, but he's all in gold. He's shining with a golden sort of light. And near his feet are a bunch of children, toddlers and maybe, 5, 6 years old, and a bunch of toddlers, all of them sort of laying on the ground, seated or standing, and sort of looking up to him, right? And that is the sort of ideal, that's the poise in which I look at Savitri, right? The pretense of, and I apply it to myself first of all, the notion of knowledge of having accomplished all of that becomes utterly useless. It does not take one very far, and approaching Savitri, it's an impediment. So you become this dumb child who knows nothing, who is nothing, because that's what we are, and as a sadhak, that's what I am eventually. If the divine force is not there, because all the good bits come from there. It's Homer's sing to me muse, right? It's that muse. The divine is the muse. So when I sit with Savitri, when I read some of these, when I begin to write the response, uh, it's always in the sequence, right? I read the passage, and I tell myself, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? You are incapable. You're a duffer. What the hell? He's master is speaking of realizations from a completely different level altogether. All these emotions sort of run through my mind, and then I, become the dumb child and wait, right? And the words form, right? And the words start forming in the head, and sometimes I'm able to feel the mind intervening, the mind making a mental choice because of the other poetry that I've read, or even master's poetry, right? You've looked at that particular poetry, and it sort of comes and influences you, right? So some of that happens. I perceive that, but then the more you wait and the more you can keep your head clear of other influences, the words start pouring. And when they start pouring, it comes as a trickle. It's the first sentence that comes, I catch it, and then, the luminous web, right? Master is the spiritual spider, he weaves this web. So he has given you one particular strand, you catch that strand, and don't pull, right? When I say don't pull, don't be eager to finish it or write it, or because pulling that inspiration doesn't work, right? You got to sit and sort of wait and let it sort of flow through you, flow into you. And once that movement is caught, then it becomes much easier, because again, there is a whole gradation of these levels from which the inspiration comes. So I say gradations because sometimes it's a word vision, because as I'm receiving the words, I sometimes end up having that experience. Sometimes I see what he's sort of describing, and as I see, it's in the mind's eye, right? I sort of see it, and it just comes through. And until it finishes, you until it finishes, it typically doesn't stop. Sometimes it adds embellishments, sometimes it does not. But there is a certain poise that I sort of keep, right? So when I say poise that I keep, uh, when I try to look at one sentence and try to render it, and I try to be faithful to every word and every comma and full stop that he has put. So you will see that getting better and better over time if you look at the responses that have come over the years. because there's a very specific reason why he's pausing something there. You know, it's a particular movement, and he's pausing the material there, and I try to follow it. You know, if he has put a comma there, then I'll have to do something. You know, or rather aspire to do something to structure the language so that the comma can be put there, right? And if you read Savitri with that attention to detail, you find that it reveals itself more and more, and it's a staggering sort of beauty, right? Beauty and power, and so much more. I say staggering because it's almost like as if you're a jeweler, right? And you've been given this little gem for the day to go study deeply, and you look at every cut, every facet, every hue of light that's sort of getting reflected, and you pay attention to all of that. And the more you pay attention, the more you aspire, the more that is revealed. And you always come back from it. I don't know. It's like how do I put it? It's weirdly like what's the image I can use? Uh, uh, let's say Achilles being dipped into this magical river by his mother, right? Held by his toes. He just dips and the bugger's like immortal now, he can't be touched in any of the parts where he's dipped. It's like that. You take a dip into that light, into Savitri, and you come out, and something is added to you. Now, often you don't know it because Master, unfortunately, is not the spiritual show off types, right? Otherwise, me and Hemant and many like Sri Aurobindo's disciples would be like little gurus floating around. But because of the what do you say the enormity, we sort of see that enormity, right? There's hardly any place for ego. You dip, you come out glorious, but then you're back to your routine work and day and so on, right? As if nothing has happened. Now, this is open to everybody, whether a riffraff like me can sort of get to it. It's open to all, and that's how enormously significant Savitri is. At least from my experience.
Beautiful, beautiful. It's been a privilege to listen to you so far,
Privileged to speak of
Mahesh. Now,
Master Hemant.
indeed, 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 indeed. So I'll actually open it up to anybody who wants to come up and reflect on what was said, or any specific questions to Mahesh. Please raise your hand, and I'll pull you up. And Summer,
Hello.
Thandi Hawa Ka Jhoka. And I see your DP, you have the master's picture.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's the picture Mahesh was talking about. That's the painting.
Yes. So I have a question.
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Summer. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Hello, Callus. And this painting I put as, the moment you told to the audience that about Preeti Ghosh, and immediately I started searching. And as you just spoke about this painting, this was the painting right in front of me. And I have read, Aurobindo sir, I've read The Secret of Vedas, and even that half book. I mean, it's in two parts,
Yeah.
and I completed the half part, and even that half part, that brilliant work opened so many, my ignorance was shunned to quite an extent because of it. And like you beautifully explained, even that last part where you said that one can read, and like this, you don't see the disciples floating around as mini gurus, because it is that pure a work,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
where one is able to sustain
Yeah.
it. And so that I can see how brilliantly you have been a disciple in your own ways to Sri Aurobindo. And therefore I want to ask you one
Mm-hmm.
question.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
so the question is, this inspiration which he got to write Savitri, or whatever he did in his life, the
Yeah.
works which he has left for
Mm-hmm.
us, and this, where has he mentioned anywhere, where did this inspiration come from? Why did he pen it down? Why did these things happen? Like whatever happened through him.
Oh, it's funny you should ask. It's a very good question, by the way. It's a very good question. There is a
Thank you.
clue. There is a clue in Master's Record of Yoga. I told you those two volumes, right? There is a clue in Record of Yoga where he's going through these experiences where he has crossed the overmind layers. He's sort of hitting various plane levels of the supermind. So I mean, those who are coming from a Vedanta perspective, this is like almost hitting the Satchidananda layers, right? And he's doing it consciously, right? When I say consciously, he's wide-eyed, open. He's not swooning into some samadhi. He's not absorbed, gone off inside, where he's become like a zombie or a jata, they call it, right? Like a dead body outside, right? Those experiences are also there. But in the Pondicherry stages, he's the need to swoon is gone, right? So he's sort of conscious, right? Now, in Record of Yoga, he notes at a particular place that the inspiration for writing, right? Special writing is getting prepared, right? And he's marking out time specifically for it, and inspiration is pouring down. Now, just so you know, he is not doing any of these works from a mental desire or some, wish that he ought to write all of these things. Now, when I say all of these things, I mean all of Arya. So pretty much all his works, right? Pretty much all his works and Savitri, these were not written because, of course, if you look at the human circumstance, you will know that, he began Arya as collaboration between Richard, who was mother's husband at that time, between Richard and him, they sort of began the Arya at that time, right? But the secret preparation, the yogic preparation is happening behind the scenes, right? And that is why he's sort of literally writing all of these books in parallel. It's just coming down, packed inspiration. So maybe there was this sankalpa, his will, that some of these things ought to be captured in written form so that people like us could make use of it. But I like to think of it as the higher will, which is again he himself, will that is sort of deciding what ought to be written and how it ought to be written, right? And that is why you hardly see, for example, if you take the RPF, right, from volume to volume, if you remember that these were monthly chapters, monthly volumes that were coming out, at the start of the month, let's say, right? And there are literally like four books that he's writing in parallel. So this is Synthesis of Yoga, Life Divine, Essays on the Gita, Secret of the Veda, all in parallel, chapter after chapter. Now, he doesn't have any assistants, there's no computer, there's nothing. But you go look at, let's say, something like The Life Divine, right? You will see that he finishes a chapter, and the next chapter, when he begins, right, he'll summarize what has happened before. Now, everything is inspired. And that's the reason there is no pause, nothing. It's just flowing through him. It's like Ganga, right? It's just flowing, relentlessly pouring down. And he's noting it down. And that's why, many of these passages, even especially, let's say you take something like Essays on the Gita, and Mother makes a particular comment actually. This particular time when he was writing essays on the Gita, it seems his identification, his surrender, or whatever you want to call it, right? Identification with a higher, whatever you want to call it, the supreme divine, Purushottama, Brahman, whatever, right? Was so complete. He says, Mother says that there was not a particle that was stirring, nothing was disturbing him. It was the concentration was so intense that it was palpable physically. It was like a ambience, it's just pouring into him, and that's what he's capturing, right? So it's it's Sri Aurobindo, so the sankalpa is always there, but it's not the time born Sri Aurobindo who's doing the work, right? It's the immortal part that's sort of speaking with the inner voice, inner lips, So yeah, that's where it comes from, at least my
Wow.
understanding.
Wow, thank you so much for telling me that. And of course, the words do touch the heart, whatever you said, because the work that we read, it's so brilliant, it is so vast, it is so deep, that it couldn't have, I think it's not possible for a mortal just in a mortal way to do that thing. So yeah, it's inspiration, and it's that fluid. Okay, so just one more question which I
Yes,
have,
please.
and yeah. So this question again, it's important for me, so I ask. I believe, these. For example, there are seven sages that we speak about,
Uh-huh.
Saptarishi. Then there is. So I want to know. I believe these things exist esoterically and exoterically. Ultimately, for me, the truth has to be like that one indivisible thing, which of course would integrate even the thing life as we know it and as we see it
Yeah.
also. Okay, so for me, something exists esoterically and exoterically in
Mm-hmm.
combination. So here I ask out of my own
Mm-hmm.
joy, that where Sri Aurobindo was, who was he? Like we hear there are people incarnation of so and so, so and so. Is it mentioned anywhere what Sri Aurobindo was?
I think it's there in one of his letters itself. One of some of his letters, especially in the later period, right? So there was this. So again, see the process of avatarhood, right? Vibhuti or avatarhood is a perhaps an art. It's a big topic for another time. Now, again, for those of you who are not familiar, the Gita gives this definition of avatar as the manifestation of the divine himself, him or her coming down and sort of taking a human birth. And there are vibhutis. Vibhutis are special emanations who come for a very specific, narrow purpose. And Sri Aurobindo himself says that vibhutis are not always spiritual beings, right? It need not necessarily be a Vivekananda always, right? Sri Aurobindo says that Napoleon was a vibhuti, right? They can be musicians, they can be great generals, they can be great politicians who come with that uncommon purpose. So, for example, someone like Da Vinci, right? Um, it's crazy, it's unimaginable how one mind in the Middle Ages, sitting in the middle of Europe, can be so brilliant in so many fields, right? It's humanly not possible, right? Now, these are the vibhutis. Now, why am I making this point? Because there was a particular time where Sri Aurobindo identifies himself with Kali. He signs his letters as Kali, right? Identification was so complete, her descent into him. Now, remember, someone like Kali, or one of the mother's forms, the fiercer forms, giving one sword to Shivaji Maharaj makes a Shivaji Maharaj, right? Makes a Chhatrapati. One sword, mind you. And now we are talking about someone into whom she has entered and manifested. And he's balanced. He's not going cuckoo. He's not, stripping his dress and going in mad ecstasy. No, balanced. He has swallowed it and he's holding it in balance, right? That's number one. Number two, in the later periods, especially post the Alipur jail period, there comes a time, again, I'll give you two instances, right? Uh, one is in the Alipur jail, there is the voice of Swami Vivekananda and Krishna giving him the Sapta Chatushtaya. Again, that's topic for another day. The discipline of the seven tetrads, right? Seven fours, right? There's a spiritual discipline which Sri Krishna gives him particularly, saying, "Do this. This is what I've brought you here for," right? So that's one. And another is again a crazy incident. So Sri Aurobindo is sort of digging into the Vedas and he's beginning to get into the details of Sanskrit, the details, the root words, root sounds, and so on. And the output of that particular period, whatever he found out in that period, is this particular essay called The Origins of Human Speech, of Aryan speech, the origins of Aryan speech, where he's digging into the details of how human language came to be, and he's using Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, and Tamil as the four example languages in which these ancient speech forms are sort of preserved, right? He has documented it. Now, here's the funny thing. He's learning Tamil. Oh, by the way, he was learning Tamil from Subramanya Bharatiyar. Bharatiyar again was a poet, a Tamil poet, a nationalist freedom fighter in Pondicherry. So Bharatiyar is visiting him, teaching him Tamil. And by the way, he's not just learning, basic Tamil, right? He's already translating the Alvar poetry. He's translating Tirukkural. His level of Tamil is working at that level, right? Now, he's sort of sharing these details of the origin of human speech, Aryan speech, with Bharatiya, right? He's sort of telling him, you know what, I found this, discovered whatever, right? So Bharatiya asks him a question. He says, who told you this? Who taught you this? Okay. And guess the response. And here's the response. Now remember, this is early Pondicherry period. Early Pondicherry period. So this is not the period where he's looking like a god, right? It's not. He's like this dark Bengali chap, right? He's at that stage right now, right? And guess what his answer was? His answer was, Sri Krishna taught it to me. Origin of human speech. Sri Krishna taught it to me. Right? Now, this is the second portion, the transition. Now, the third transition. So we began with Kali. Then you're looking at, I mean, it's like, he needs a tutor. It's like YouTube, right? There's someone who can teach him anything that he wants. And Sri Krishna is teaching it to him. And then comes the next period where I'll give you the anecdote of this particular disciple called Dilip Kumar Roy, one of the earlier disciples, right? Now, Dilip Kumar Roy was a Vaishnava by temperament, and he was and he goes through a very, very difficult yogic process. Very difficult. He's literally being slaughtered and quartered every day. Now, he considered Dilip Kumar Roy as a spiritual son. So he took care of him literally like a mother, saying, don't cry, don't run away, stay with me, I'll take care of you, don't worry, there's this, that, and so on, right? Now, but even though Dilip Kumar Roy was so devoted and fond of Sri Aurobindo, etc., his spiritual inclination always went to Vishnu and Krishna. Yeah, the Vaishnavite temperament, right? That's his temperament. He wants the Krishna form. Now, there are letters that he has written to Dilip where he says, it's the same Krishna that you pray to, who's in me right now. Because there is a particular descent. He observes that process. There's the descent of Krishna into the physical, into his body. Right? Now, again, I think this was in the 1926 period. He says there is no difference. It's, he's in me. It's me. Right? So, so, the process of avatarhood is a very complicated affair. It's not this, very simple, Devaki in prison and boom, Krishna comes down. It's not always so simple. There are lots more dynamics, which I think we can go into in another session, perhaps. But but if you ask me, of course, I'm biased, right? I'm biased towards the master, so I can't help it. So, but there is this evidence of him signing his letters as Kali, of him, talking to Krishna, and then at some point in time, there's the descent of the Krishna principle into his physical, and he's telling someone like Dilip Kumar Roy, like, dude, there's no difference, right? I'll take care of you. So that's what I think here is.
Wow. Wow, Kalis. Thank you so much. But with the liberty, I mean, him and I have a couple of questions more. Is it okay if I
Yeah, yeah,
ask?
no problem,
Or,
please. No
Yes,
problem.
please. Yes, please. And it's open now. If anybody else wants to come up, please do raise hands and I'll pull you up. So go ahead, someone.
yes, Kalis, my third question is this is regarding the relics of Master. Now, you know that we've heard these things, like Buddha's relics are also there, I suppose, in those Dhamma places. So, how if see when I went to Pondicherry,
Mm-hmm.
I really did not know that there were relics there, and that how what is the importance of it. Like I went in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and I just went and and like I told you, I've read his book also. So for in some mystical ways, Master is has been in my life. He has arrived, or I've been his, I've read his works, but I did not understand the importance of those relics, when I went there. So my question is, if I was unaware when I went
Mm-hmm.
there, do you think it would still have, somehow blessed me, affected me, helped me? What do you think? What is your view when it comes to his relics and its effectiveness? Yeah.
I won't speak to the relics directly, but who do you think even took you there?
Yeah.
Who,
So that was my fourth question,
you know,
Callis. When you just with the statement is my fourth question coming. You tell me now, how does Sri Aurobindo, how does he bring us to him? How does he arrive? How do we go to him? How,
it's
why are only few people? Yeah.
there is something, right? There is a certain way in which omniscience works, right? And I use this word very carefully, right? Omniscience, it's a staggering, humongously scary thing, right? It's scary, right? Now, if you have even accidentally stumbled on his name or his word, you have found, for example, I've found many times in my life when I was, I was filled with aspiration and this in India, especially southern India, you get this street side budgie shops, this fried snack that they make, budgie shops, and they wrap it in a newspaper and give you. I've had messages given to me in a newspaper in a budgie, right, wrapped. If you have
Wow,
seen it,
wow, wow.
he is sending it to you.
Brilliant.
He's sending it to you, right? There's no two
Wow.
ways about it. There are no accidents here. There are no. I like the word serendipity, right? It's a thing, but bottom line is he's dragging you, right? I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but but you see my point, right? So
Yeah.
there are no accidents, you saw it. There is a certain possibility. You pursued it, and as the connection grows stronger, then you are either dragged to Pondicherry, or even it's not necessary to visit that place itself. You don't need to bother about relics or whatever, right? You call him, he'll come. So he's infinite. No limitation. It's not like one small guy who has to do time slicing between many devotees. You know, this is infinite. So you call, it can happen. Right. So not a problem.
Wow. So with that, just I would like to just probably I thought that I had these four questions, but I promise this is my fifth and the last question
Not a
is that
problem.
if if one is following Aurobindo, and like you said, you remember you spoke about the disciple Deepak Roy, who is
Yeah.
Vaishnav in his temperament and wouldn't want to let go of
Yeah.
Krishna. So I want to ask you, if someone has that kind of also configuration in their head,
Hmm.
and if one still is so drawn to Aurobindo, the messages, like you said, how the connection is taking place,
Yeah.
if by being with Aurobindo, one wouldn't really lose out, like you said, it was so, it was so assuring when you said that Sri Aurobindo mentioned once that Krishna entered his body. So that way, if I am of a Vaishnav
Hmm.
temperament, by following Aurobindo, I wouldn't lose out on my Krishna, right?
No, no, no.
So,
See, this is where the taxonomy helps, right? When I say taxonomy, if your taxonomy is narrow, so let's say you're a staunch Shaivite, you don't accept any other god, it's only Shiva, it's only Mahadeva, and you want Mahadeva in this particular form. If you what do you say, bind yourself to these narrow forms, it makes it a little more difficult for the realizations pertaining to that form to come. So I'll tell you why. Because the narrower you are, uh, in the past, it used to be that you have to focus and stick to one form so that you can realize that form, right? That's what it was in the past. But times now are such that if you take that approach, it will probably take you many lifetimes. So, easiest, what I found to be easiest is to widen oneself and forgive my language, but think of oneself, I think of myself as a beggar, right? I don't care if he chooses to give me something in the form of Shiva or Krishna or any other form. I'm a beggar. I'll take any food that anyone gives, right? Any of the deities give, right? Now, if you take that approach, you find that you are not what do you say, denied any aspect, whether it's the mother forms, it's the male forms, whatever forms that you like, right? All of them come. And I myself personally, by tradition, I'm supposed to be from the Vaishnavite sort of path, right? When I say Vaishnavite, it's nothing big. Don't think of it as, the traditional types, nothing like that. It's just that our Kula Devam, or the family deity, right? Our family deity is Venkateshwara. It's a form of Vishnu. Uh, that's the form that I sort of grew up with. My name itself is sort of Shiva's name, so there was some affinity to that particular form. But there have been experiences of all of these deities, all of these forms, whether it is Vishnu, Shiva, Narasimha, they all come, right? Number one. And I want to sort of step back, and you didn't ask a question on that, but you just mentioned it in the context of another question. You mentioned Saptarishis, right? Same
Yes.
thing with the Saptarishis also. You want a contact with them, aspire for it. I don't believe in this, esoteric, exoteric, these things. I don't even understand them most of the time. These are realities. You call when you're ready, they come. The contact will be made. Unmistakable contact. So I'm not talking about traveling into other planes via substance. Nothing like that. Conscious state, wide awake, pure, clean consciousness. You can make contact, you will make contact, or they will make contact. These experiences will come, and and you don't have to wear a saffron robe or renounce the world or anything funky like that. So yeah, so
So that's very reassuring where you said that one is not denied. In the end, if one wishes to have a mother around or a friend around, no one is denied anything,
absolutely.
right? So because see why I ask, see for me, like you said, that it would take a lot of, for me, I find Krishna after, see, of course I was born into it, but then of course I did a lot of detour. I mean, not detour, but of course, yeah, I did other things also, and then Sri Aurobindo also came into my life and everything, and I find Krishna again by
Yeah.
choice. Now I choose that I want
Mm,
him.
mm,
See,
mm, mm, mm.
and so this is very reassuring that okay, if I still want to read more of Aurobindo, understand more, maybe it's just for the pure joy of knowing the whole thing, I will not be denied what I want
Absolutely.
in the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Nothing is
yeah.
done. And yes,
So
I want to mention this particular line, right? This comes from, I think it's Synthesis of Yoga or Life Divine, I'm not too sure. There is this chapter on bhakti. So Master is speaking of bhakti, right? And he goes through all the details of bhakti, etc., lays them out, and he sort of finishes the chapter. I'm just paraphrasing that sentence. I don't remember the exact language. So he says, nothing is denied to the God lover. He says, nothing is denied to the God lover, for he is the very self of the beloved. And he uses the word beloved with a capital B, a capital B. And
wow,
that is 100%, 1,000 trillion% true. To the God lover,
wow.
nothing is denied. So yeah.
Wow, that was like Kalisji, some
No, no,
other
please
day
skip
when
the
you're
G now,
free.
please.
I want to, no, no, okay, okay, Kali's brood Maheshji. Okay, listen, someday I would want to know more about your Kali's brood also. And of course, you being such a brilliant poet, when Hemant is such a awe of you, and I'm already so much in awe of Hemant's work, so I can understand and whom am I talking to here? But some other day, maybe some more knowledge from you regarding even your poetries, your Kali's Brood, and also Sri Aurobindo. Do please conduct more rooms like this, and I'm really grateful that you are here. I'm grateful to him and then Nana, no, Rachna, Nana also, for conducting this room. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for the questions, please.
Thank you, Summer. That was beautiful interaction. And yeah, Kali's Brood. I think you've become part of Kali's Brood now. You're another chick now. Yeah, I certainly snuck in somewhere under the wings through
No,
Twitter.
no. Like I mentioned yesterday in our conversations, children of the same
Mm,
mother. So that's where the concordance with experience and everything comes from. It's all her carries.
absolutely,
Nothing moves without her. And of course, master's sanction, right? He has to
absolutely.
give that nod. That nod comes from him.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Anybody else, please, if you want to share your thoughts, reflections of the talk so far, or any questions, please do raise your hands. And Rachna ji, you've been very quiet. Would you care to share your reflections, please?
I am just completely awestruck, just absolutely empty and sitting and listening. And it was so beautiful, just being in and being present and listening to that exchange between Summer and you and KB. I don't know. I'm just. In fact, there was a temptation when you mentioned Savitri to see what it is about, but then I decided against it. I wanted to come completely empty and stay. And I'm just. This is just the beginning, so I'm just looking forward to many more uh, of these interactions. And I hope we'll be reading this, right?
Reading Savitri through this medium, I think, is going to be very difficult. I think it's a like you said, it's basically individual pursuit because it's experiences. So doing it through this room, we could attempt it. Mahesh ji, what do you think? Mahesh,
Yeah,
sorry, without a G.
thank you, Heyman, for that.
Yeah,
All this G and all, no? It invites that glare from master, so we shouldn't do all of that. So so I think we could just to maybe get people started, we could attempt selections, leave pursuit of the whole material to people individually, like you said, because that's the best way to do it. But if there is that starting hesitation or whatever, right? Or maybe, the dynamics of reading, because the active reading and passive reading are two separate things, and both have their own utility. So to give people a taste of that, maybe we could, do a few sessions on some passages and then leave people to pursue the discipline on their own.
perfect. So we will attempt it. We will try something, and we will see how that evolves.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes, please. If I may recommend, we could do this if you, of course, if you both have time. Then even if brief sessions, maybe once in a week, and we just read few pages, chew and whatever,
absolutely.
and for as long as possible. No pressure, no, like you said, no need to even end or finish. Let's just get started and see how it goes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And please don't mention about having time or all of that, because it's always a privilege to talk anything about Sri Aurobindo, anything connected to him. It's also a sort of smarana, remembrance of Sri Aurobindo. So it's part of the yogic discipline. So more opportunities, the merrier. But yeah, schedules, etc., need to sort of fall in place. But it's a privilege and mother's grace that allows us to do whatever little we can. So Not on that front, let there be no issues.
Beautiful. All right. So we are at a stage where we could either close this room um, or have an open discussion. Anybody else who wants to come up, please do. Doesn't have to be about Savitri. You could just come up and interact. Um, or if you want to wind up, we could do that as well.
I think we'll wind up, Hemant, because it could be a little heavy.
There are a couple of people who are coming up.
Okay,
I've invited them.
no problem.
Um, Shiva, Aparajit raised his hand. For some reason, he's not in the speakers panel. I pulled him up. Let me invite him to speak. Yeah, Shiva, do you want to go ahead and
Yeah. Hi, Eamon.
speak? Yeah.
Hi, Rachna ji. Yeah. Hi, Khaliji. How are you?
Hey, good, Shiva.
Thank you for the beautiful room.
Hello, Shiva.
Yeah. Thank you for the beautiful room. So I've been reading Savitri for the last 20 years now. So I think so it's one of the
Wow.
most incredible things. You can say the current Vedas, the current Upanishads, everything updated to the latest
Uh,
version, in
yeah,
my view.
yeah.
And I'm in touch with a certain person from Yogi from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Shraddhalu
Oh, yeah,
Ranade.
yeah.
I don't know
Oh,
if
of course, Shraddhalu.
you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's been a close friend of mine for the last
Oh,
25
wonderful.
years. And so I came across a certain literature. I read it with him, and he has it, where I saw Sri Aurobindo's analysis on his own birth chart. Sri Aurobindo analyzing his own birth chart
Yeah.
astrologically. And what have you gone through that
No, I
literature?
haven't had
Have you seen
access
it?
to it, but I know of it because I heard of it from one of. In fact, I heard of it from Shraddhalu's talks, one of his talks. Uh, yeah. So yeah, from that sense, I'm familiar with it, but not the details.
Right. So I had a chance to go through this literature about, I can say about 18, 19 years back
Mm-hmm.
in his
Mm-hmm.
house. And he never allowed me to take this literature or photocopy it or see it. He only allowed me to read
Oh
it
wow.
there.
Okay.
Right. So in that
Mm-hmm.
literature, Sri Aurobindo is analyzing his birth
Mm-hmm.
chart, and he says this is the, and he made it specific that this should not be made of a public. This literature should not go into public.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so in that thing, he's written in that literature. It's about 10 pages on astrology, and in that analysis of his own birth chart, he says this is obviously the birth chart of the next avatar of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kalki, and he's seeing himself there analyzing his own birth chart as an
Yeah.
avatar. You can say the consciousness after Krishna, the
Yeah.
supramental
Yeah.
consciousness getting in the next level for
Yeah.
humanity. So I thought it is the most, you can say, fascinating stuff what he's left for the world, and also his own analysis on Avatar of Kalki, and also I have a friend of mine, another friend of mine, who's actually translated all of Sri Aurobindo's books, even Savitri into
Oh
Sanskrit,
wow.
like all of English into Sanskrit. So each line is translated into
Oh damn.
Sanskrit.
Okay.
And then this friend of mine has also translated all of each, you can say, couple of lines into paintings, mother's paintings of Buddha.
Oh.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so all of Savitri in visual paintings. You can have a look at the paintings altogether.
Oh, Huta I know
And he's
in
this friend of,
Savitri Bhavan, right? In
correct,
Aurobindo?
correct. So, but have you
Uh,
seen the book which has got all the Savitri in form of paintings and
No, no,
pictures?
no, no, not that. Because in Savitri Bhavan, most of the paintings are put up. I think Huta's paintings are put up. I've seen that, but no, not the book, not the book.
So there's a friend of mine who runs this website called Savitri.in and then Incarnate Word. Narendra Gehlot,
Oh, familiar with
person
both
who
of
was,
them. Oh yeah.
yeah, right. So he's translated that into Sanskrit and also into
Oh, wonderful,
paintings, basically,
wonderful.
right? And also, so I also came across certain, so this thing which you spoke about, right? This is intrinsic understanding of language, the origin of Aryan, this
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Yes,
philology,
yes,
philology.
yes.
Yeah, so that I think so was fantastic. How this piece of Sri Aurobindo's idea, all letters A, B, C, D, E, like R, E, U into Sanskrit and the powers of
Yeah,
Sanskrit, how these powers, how the mantras are formed from the very atoms of alphabets, and his understanding of tantra in a certain way through this kind of a technical
absolutely.
understanding, and then this kind of understanding. I do not know if you've gone through this literature of Sri Aurobindo called the first Rik of the Rig Veda. Have you ever
Oh
gone through
yes,
that?
oh yes,
First Rik.
yes, yes.
So that I think so is one of the most underestimated literatures of Sri
Easily.
Aurobindo, the first Rik of the Rig
Yeah,
Veda. Uh,
easily.
it has a certain bombardment of spiritual experiences in terms of kinetic spiritual
Absolutely.
experience hidden in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So and also what I find that certain writings of his. So Narendra, you're in touch with him also, like you know of him, Narendra Gelot,
N-
who's running the South.
no, no, I'm not, please. Only Hemant. No one else.
Right. And so, anyways, I just wanted to share this different thing. One is first week of Rigved, which people don't know of it, and the second is his Sanskrit version of Savitri, which I think is really incredible because each letter then of the English Sanskrit can be repeated as a shloka for that experience to come into you. You
Wonderful.
can make the experience using Sanskrit. So, I just wanted to get that across.
Absolutely.
Something which
Oh,
you should.
that would really help, please. If you share a link or something, I think that would be good. We'll pick it up
Sure,
actually.
sure. So I'll source it through Narendra and I'll share it with you for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's about it. That's nothing more. Nothing.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Shiva. Please do share that with me as well. Mahesh,
Yeah.
how are you on time?
I need to leave now, Hemant. So,
Okay, all
if there's
right.
anything, I can, I mean, if there are any questions, further questions, we could
Hmm.
address it separately, perhaps in the next session or something, or I could type out the response,
Sure.
however we want to do it.
Okay. What we will do is we'll probably kind of, if this time works for you,
Y-
Sunday evenings,
Oh, yeah, boss, that
we can
works.
schedule.
Yeah, yeah, that works.
Okay. Okay. So we'll schedule another room next Sunday,
Yeah,
and we will take it from there.
absolutely, boss. Sounds good.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Mahesh, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much for
It's
organizing,
been,
Hemant. You know,
I don't know, I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, it's been beautiful.
it's,
Thank you so much,
thank you
and
so much for the
look forward to
opportunity.
it.
Yeah.
Welcome to Clubhouse, and
And
I'm glad. Yeah, you get familiarized with this, and yeah,
thank you,
we,
Hemant. It's because
we,
of you
we
only I've
want we
managed to
want.
make it. Otherwise, completely unfamiliar with this beast. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
no. I'm glad I dragged you here, and yeah, we want to hear a lot more from you.
Absolutely, boss. Anytime. And thanks
Great.
everybody for your patience, listening, joining, taking time out. And I'd mentioned this to Hemant when we were speaking yesterday or the day before. I don't remember. Sri Aurobindo makes a particular point uh, about how his disciples ought to be, or rather, how those who pursue the yoga ought to be. He makes this statement. I don't remember exactly in which book it occurs. He says, when one of us stands up, uh, thousands around may be filled with His, that's a capital H, His light and joy and power. Right? And that's been a sort of a touchstone for me in my spiritual journey for many, many decades. And I wish that each one of you, whoever is listening, all of you may experience that light and love and power and joy and everything else and spread it to lots more people. So, with that wish, I'll finish for the day. Thank you. Pranams.
Thanks a lot, Mahesh.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you, Hemant.
and good
Thanks.
night.
Good night, Hemant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good
Good
night.
night, all.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah,
Take care.
good
Bye.
night. So, actually, at this point, I think we will conclude this room, and we will reconvene next Sunday. Thanks, Rachna, for helping me with moderation, and thanks, Shiva, and thank you all for listening. And see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Hemant. Thank you, Rachna.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right.
Looking
Good
forward
night.
to
Yeah.
beginning of the reading now.
Yeah, sure. All right. Good
Yeah.
night then.